This week on Africa Update, Russia-Ukraine war causes surge in commodity prices in Nigeria and Malawi. UN peacekeeping mission in South Sudan extended. Somalia faces third and most severe drought in a decade. Plus, the story of Zimbabwean artist who makes artistic statements out of trash. Welcome to this week's edition of Africa Update. I am Iwelia. Thank you for joining. The details now. Negotiations opened in Geneva to try to reach a more protective global framework for biodiversity to be discussed at the COP15 biodiversity meeting in China later this year. This session takes place from March 14th to 29th. This is the first face-to-face meeting for the delegation since February 2020 and the last one before the COP15, which was supposed to take place in April-May in Kunming after several postponements. But a new postponement is expected, and the meeting in Geneva will be an opportunity to announce new dates, according to the Convention on Biological Diversity Secretariat statement. According to several sources, the new dates envisaged are end of August, beginning of September. In 2019, a report by UN biodiversity experts, IPBES, revealed that 1 million species could disappear in the coming decades. Now, from airlines in Nigeria to shoppers in Malawi, Africans are feeling the impact of the Ukraine crisis in wrenching increases in the price of fuel, grain and fertilizers. Thousands of kilometers away from the front lines of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, the distance doesn't mitigate the high price local households have to pay. Global increases in the price of wheat or fertilizers have been recorded since the fight started. Cooking oil price in Malawi have already shot up by an average 50%. Africans are also feeling the impact of the Ukraine crisis in the price of fuel. In Nigeria, Africa's largest oil producer, the government subsidizes the cost of petrol, but diesel and aviation fuel are sold at market price. The operators at the different levels of the supply chain therefore pass the cost on to consumers. The cost of air tickets for domestic flights now doubles the initial cost after aviation fuel price increased to over 600 naira per litre. The full extent of the Ukraine-fueled inflation has yet to be estimated, but it is already clear that African families will be impacted. Now, South African President Cyril Ramaphosa has blamed NATO for the war in Ukraine and said he will resist calls to condemn Russia in comments that cast doubt over whether he will be accepted by Ukraine or the West as a mediator. The war could have been avoided if NATO had heeded the warnings from amongst its own leaders and officials over the years that its eastward expansion would lead to greater, not less, instability in the region, Ramaphosa said in response to questions in Parliament. But he added that South Africa cannot condone the use of force or violation of international law, an apparent reference to Russia's February 24th invasion of Ukraine. Ramaphosa also revealed that Putin had assured him personally that negotiations were making progress. The South African leader said he had not yet talked with Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky, but that he wanted to. Ramaphosa had last week hinted that South Africa had been asked to mediate in the Russia-Ukraine conflict. He did not say who had asked him to intervene. Meanwhile, President of Ghana, who is also chair of the West African Regional Bloc, ECOWAS, says there is an international dimension to the recent spate of military coups in Africa. Nana Akufo-Addo told an African Union forum that some foreign entities regard coups in Africa as a means of enhancing their regional ambition. He said outside influences were behind disinformation campaigns, undermining the authority of governments in the continent and instigating opposition protest. The president, however, did not give details of those he thought were linked to the coups. Recent military takeovers in Burkina Faso, Mali and Guinea have prompted calls for African leaders to promote good governance in order to subdue disaffection among citizens. 18 African leaders have either modified or eliminated constitutional term limits in the past 2 decades, while another 18 have resisted efforts to institute term limits, according to the Africa Center for Strategic Studies. Most of these countries had experienced civil unrest or coups, it stated. Now, a representative of West Africa's regional bloc said it will keep working with Burkina Faso despite concerns about the military junta's plan to hold power for 3 years after a January coup. The Economic Community of West African States suspended Burkina Faso after the military ousted President Roch Kabore, but has not imposed sanctions as it did on neighboring Mali and Guinea, where the military have also snatched power in the last 18 months. Ghana's Foreign Minister Shirley Ayoko Bochwe, who led the delegation to the Burkina capital, Ouagadougou, said that ECOWAS was concerned about the 3-year transition back to democracy, to democratic elections, but that the military leadership had explained their reasoning. ECOWAS has demanded the release of former President Kabore, who has been in custody for nearly 2 months since the coup. Ayoko Bochwe said that Damiba gave the delegation permission to visit him and that he is in good spirit. Now, Mali's military junta will suspend broadcast by French state-funded international news outlets RFI and France 24, accusing them of reporting false allegations. In a statement, Mali said it was taking the action because both channels had reported on allegations made by United Nations Rights Commission Michelle Bachelet and rights group Human Rights Watch and had alleged that Malian soldiers were responsible for killing at least 71 civilians since early December. Radio broadcaster RFI this week also ran a series of testimonies from alleged victims who claimed that they had been tortured by Malian soldiers and suspected Russian mercenaries operating alongside them. Mali government spokesman Colonel Abdoulaye Maiga said that these false allegations were made in reports on 14th and 15 March. It said in the statement that what it called media hype was a premeditated strategy aimed at destabilizing the political transition, demoralize the Malian people, and discredit the Malian army. Relations between Mali and former colonial master France soared in recent months, particularly since the junta fell back on election promise and started working with private Russian fighters in a long-running battle against insurgents. The United Nations Security Council voted to extend for a year the peacekeeping mission in South Sudan. The resolution sets the end of the mission's mandate on March 15, 2023. The current level of deployment should remain unchanged, and up to 17,000 blue helmets and 2,100 police officers can be mobilized. The resolution, which was voted by 13 members of the Security Council, states 3 primary goals to the peacekeeping mission: prevent a return to civil war in South Sudan, to build durable peace, and support inclusive and accountable governance, as well as free, fair, and peaceful elections. The operation is one of the most expensive for the UN, with an annual budget surpassing $1 billion. Now, Algeria's President Abdelmadjid Tebboune ordered on Sunday the banning of exports of all consumer products that Algeria imports, such as sugar, pasta, oil, semolina, and all wheat derivatives. The announcement followed a meeting of Council of Ministers. The presidential decision means that not only Algerian economic operators are not allowed to export food products made from imported raw materials, but also they risk legal action in case of infringement. In addition, the President of the Republic asked the government to continue to ban completely the import of frozen meat and to encourage the consumption of locally produced meat. An official at the Ministry of Commerce announced the import in anticipation of Ramadan, which begins in early April, of 3,000 tons of frozen meat out of a total of 54,000 tons of fresh and frozen red meat. Somalia is currently facing its third and most severe drought of the last decade. Isolated areas, particularly villages and settlements in central and southern regions, are the most affected. Women and children are particularly vulnerable. Many have no choice but to leave. The journey to safety involves passing through territories controlled by armed groups. Abdi Dagani, member of the International Committee of the Red Cross team based in Kismayo, says that the situation is very desperate, with a lot of more people coming to the stabilization center. According to him, the center has received more malnourished children, but the biggest worry is the lack of health services in the rural areas. Humanitarian organizations estimate that 1.4 million children, nearly half of Somali's under 5 population, are likely to suffer from acute malnutrition provoked by the drought. Meanwhile, Somali's government has appealed to the international community for humanitarian support, saying that 6.9 million people have been affected by the severe drought, which is ravaging several parts of the country. Prime Minister Mohamed Roble, in a statement issued in Mogadishu, the capital of Somalia, urged donors to hasten aid as the drought condition is deteriorating. Roble, who held a meeting with representatives of the donor community, said the drought has affected nearly 6.9 million people and more than 9.5 million livestock, with 2.6 million people facing severe water shortages. The appeal came after the United Nations Office for the Coordination of Humanitarian Affairs has warned that the drought emergency is expected to get worse ahead of the next rainy season in April, noting that cases of measles and acute watery diarrhea, cholera, are on the rise. OCHA said that additional funding for priority sectors is urgently required to save lives and livelihoods, adding that local communities, authorities, and humanitarian partners continue scaling up assistance within available resources. You're watching Africa Update. Still ahead, the story of Zimbabwean artist who makes artistic statements out of trash. Join us again for more. Thanks for staying. You're watching Africa Update. Here's a look at the top stories again. Russia-Ukraine war causes surge in commodity prices in Nigeria and Malawi. Plus, United Nations Security Council voted to extend for a year the peacekeeping mission in South Africa. And now, in other news, the United Nations Security Council voted to extend for a year the peacekeeping mission in South Sudan. The U.S. Secretary of State, Anthony Blinken, and African Union Commission Chairperson Moussa Faki Mohammed signed a memorandum of cooperation to expand a public health partnership between the United States and the African Union at the State Department. Blinken and Chairperson Faki Mohammed met in Washington as part of the 8th U.S. African Union Commission high-level dialogue and to reinforce President Biden's commitment to Africa. Blinken said that the U.S.-AU partnership is vital to advancing global health security and combating COVID-19, strengthening democracy and human rights, security, climate change, and building a strong and inclusive global economy. The Republic of Chad has handed over the leader of anti-Balaka armed group, Maxime Mokom, to the International Criminal Court on suspicion of war crimes and crimes against humanity, the Hague Court confirmed. Mokom is suspected of war crimes and crimes against humanity allegedly committed in Bangui and other locations in the Central African Republic in 2013 and 2014, the ICC said in a statement. The country was plunged into its worst crisis since independence after longtime Christian leader Francois Bozize was ousted by rebels from the Seleka force in March 2013, triggering a wave of violence with anti-Balaka militias. Despite a 2019 peace deal, militia groups that emerged during the conflict were recently in control of around two-thirds of the country, and Toedera depends heavily on UN forces as well as military personnel sent by Russia and Rwanda. Dozens of Gambians have fled border regions since the Senegal launched an offensive against separatist rebels from Casamanche. Since 1982, that the rebels are engaged in a low-intensity conflict that has claimed thousands of lives. Gambian President Adama Barrow has promised help to the displaced. The number of displaced is unclear. A local resident claims that at least 100 people entered his village. The Red Cross is already present in the field and is assessing the situation. Senegalese President Macky Sall has made achieving definitive peace in Casamance a priority of his second term in office. Now, Kenya's deputy president has taken a swipe at his boss, President Uhuru Kenyatta, over his decision to support the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga. Ruto accused Kenyatta of his economic policies, claiming that Kenya was heading in the wrong direction and that he will fix the mess within 30 days after being elected to the office. The statement was in relation to current Kenya's public debt, which has risen by $61.32 billion from nearly $17 billion since Kenyatta assumed office in 2013. Ruto was declared as the presidential candidate to his new outfit, the United Democratic Alliance Party, during a national delegation that brought in more than 5,000 delegates across the country. He also accused Kenyatta of failing to honor his 2017 election promises and using state institutions to prosecute political opponents. Ruto's fallout with Kenyatta began when, in 2018, the former Prime Minister Raila Odinga made a peace truce, popularly known as the handshake, with the current president. The handshake sparked speculation the two men had made a pact that will see Odinga succeed Kenyatta, a two-term president who cannot run a third time. The two leaders also sought to expand executive through proposed constitutional changes that will have potentially allowed Kenyatta to stay in power as a prime minister. Now, former Zambian President Rufia Boizani Banda, 85, died at home after a short battle with colon cancer, his family and the presidency said. Banda, Zambia's fourth president, who was in power from 2008 to 2011, was diagnosed with cancer 2 years ago and had been receiving medical treatment. Addressing the nation in a special televised address, President Hakainde Hichilema paid tribute to his predecessor. In capital city Lusaka, where Banda had his family home, a sober mood hung over several restaurants and pubs as people turned in to Hichilema's address. Banda had held a senior diplomatic post on the first president, Kenneth Kaunda, before being eventually named as vice president in 2006 by then-president Levi Mwanawasa. Banda served as acting president in mid-2008 when Mwanawasa suffered a stroke. Banda narrowly won October elections the same year on a ruling party ticket. His tenure was marred by allegations of graft, and in 2013, Zambia's parliament stripped Banda of immunity from prosecution, clearing the way for investigators to arrest him for corruption-related offenses. Banda stood accused of abuse of office, corrupt acquisition of public property, and misappropriation of public funds involving more than $11 million during his tenure as president, but was never convicted in a court of law and did not serve any jail time. Now, the wearing of masks in public in Namibia and negative PCR tests for vaccinated visitors are no longer required. President Hage Geingob said as active COVID-19 cases fall to just a couple of hundred. Infections peaked at more than 30,000 per month in June 2021, but the Southern African country has averaged 14 cases per day during the last 7 days, with the total active cases at 222. Fully vaccinated travelers to Namibia are also no longer required to produce negative PCR test results. Travelers to the country are now only allowed to produce a valid vaccination card at points of entry. Visitor numbers are currently at a third of pre-pandemic levels, according to Geingob. Only 21.4% of Namibia's eligible population of 1.7 million people have been fully vaccinated. The recommended population coverage to achieve national herd immunity is 60%. Now, one man's trash is another man's treasure. The saying literally described the works of Johnson Zuze, a 36-year-old Zimbabwean mixed media artist who makes artistic statements out of trash. Armed with nothing but his hands and the junk he collects from dump sites, his hometown of Chitungwiza, about 30 kilometers south of Harare, the capital of Zimbabwe, Zuze is fighting hard for raising awareness about the protection of the environment, not by words, but through visual artistic expressions. Take a look.
I collect items of urban junk, either from street corners or landfills. Then I give them a new existence beyond their primary use into poetic justice dimension. Also, it needs something like a million years to decompose. So those are the materials that are not usually charged, those that take long to decompose. During the start of the pandemic, I started to receive more commissioned works, maybe just because I was using the internet more than before.
Now, the Sanhov lily pan is clay plain in southern region of Namibia, near the town of Maltehohe, 300 kilometers from the capital Windhoek. Miracles happen whenever rainfall reaches 15 to 30 cm. Thousands of lilies bloom at the same time, turning the entire area into a sea of flowers. The lilies also brought good business to local accommodation establishments in the area, with most of them fully booked, said Rene Mostet, a manager at Anandi Guest House. Take a look.
The lilies only bloom in marsh area, last for 6 to 7 days, and then wither. During this short time, over 700 hectares of land is pink, white, and green. With the shame of this spectacle, it is very rare and special to be able to witness this sight of flowers in full bloom.
With that, we've come to the end of Africa Update for this week. Join us next week for another edition of the program. I am Ayuba Ilya. Thank you for watching.